friends, and this week I'm going to talk about ancient stonework, ancient walls, ancient questions. Now, I'll remind you, I am not an archaeologist or a heavily educated scholar of any sort. Yeah, I have a minor degree from a local community college. I drive a grease truck for a living. I am not road scholar. But I have been a curious individual my entire life. I've been a fan of history. I've read history. I've studied history to some degree. Maybe not obsessed with it enough where I can quote verbal word and Bible of this, that, and the other thing, word and verse of everything. But it's still, there's a lot of things that go on in our world that I puzzle over. And one of those things has always been my this interest in this ideology, this idea that some point in history or prehistory or before written history or surviving history, humanity has had advanced technology. Whether we've created it ourselves, we found another alternate way of dealing with something, or we've been given this technology by an outside source. And there are numerous ways for that to potentially occur, hypothetically speaking. The obvious aliens, dimensional travelers, visions and words from beyond, alternate dimensions, the mysteries of the mind. There's also the possibility that our humanity has in its extremely long life. Homo erectus has been around a lot longer, and we're just now hearing evidence of it. The mainline science and society is grudgingly accepting the plausibility that our humanity is tens of thousands of years older. Our current roots of our current civilization is tens of thousands of years older than what we've been led to believe and what that they've insisted on, because they all decided, those who that do those things conspire, whether purposely or ignorantly, unknowingly or unintentionally or intentionally, decided this is how things must have been. And then any idea outside that is squashed, poo-pooed, chased down, shot, buried, ignored, lampooned, what have you, until grudgingly later somebody goes, maybe they were, so-and-so might have been onto something. So when I hear these stories, and most of this is set in South America, in and around Peru, Pumapuku and Machu Picchu, etc., is the most prominent stuff on the internet. But it's not by any means the only proof of ancient or evidence of solid ancient architecture. Somebody, somewhere, at some point in our history had the ability to do this sort of thing that we're looking at right freaking now. And they say that this is some of the hardest stone on the planet. And to take crude stone tools or copper or bronze tools and to etch these things and create these things in such a manner that they fit together, let alone lift them up and put them in place. And they're so durable that here they are, thousands, potentially tens of thousands of years later, still sitting there. That it's not possible. Yet we have evidence in places like Montana, Zimbabwe, Egypt, India, Central Asia, Japan, go all around the world. And there's architecture, there's this stonework that defies modern comprehension and convention. And you don't have to go back tens of thousands of years. You can go back a few thousand years to Rome, and it's said that Rome had a form of concrete that we can't replicate today. They lost the formula to how to create this stuff, so it sets up underwater real nice, and is extremely, extremely durable. Hence the reason that a lot of the Roman ruins that still exist because not because of the fault of the material in the manufacture or even in the design of the and placement of the material, but in things like man destroying it, wars, cataclysms like earthquakes and things knocking the legs literally out from under it. That's not to say, but there are still works that defy how they were. We just can't come to a satisfying conclusion how they were created, why we know why, but how. and why they're so durable. And we can't recreate that Roman concrete, to my knowledge. Now, there are some that claim that we're close, or we just don't recognize it, so on and so forth. I know that current concrete that we use is not nearly as durable, because most of the concrete in my neck of the woods is within 50 years or so, it's already deteriorating pretty bad. It doesn't take long, right? And it might be because of the materials in them, et cetera, et cetera. The other problem is, we're not going to talk about how they move these things. I'm more concerned about just discussing the idea that they're there, and try to understand, in my opinion, in my mind, and what if what we're looking at in the actual truth is the truth, and we just won't accept what it is. It's implied that most of the stonework of these large places in South America, right, is so intricate, so detailed. And here's an example of where the stonework, look at the amount of angles and manipulations that would be taken to create that particular pattern in the center there. You get these two stones to hook together in such a perfect way. The fact that they went through all that effort to even do that kind of makes me question why we would do that in the first place, other than it was easy to do. I mean, we're looking at a jagged zipper formation with a very narrow piece on the top that, by all conventions of natural stuff or man-made stuff we know today, should have cracked and broke at that joint. I mean, hello? So if you have the technology, and it's painstaking, and it's hard, and you're going to use crude tools and a lot of effort, a lot of back muscle, a lot of sweat and labor to form a stone to fit into a defensive work, why would you go to this length to create that pattern? Why not just get another chunk of stone that's more squared off like the rest of them and work on that? Well, because perhaps it was much easier for them to cut and form and shape than what we know of. We just simply cannot get that through our head that they figured out a way to cut stone and cut it fairly quickly and rapidly and painlessly, not to mention maneuvering it. I don't know what the size that stone is verbatim and how much it weighs, but if you're talking something over 100 pounds or a couple hundred pounds, just trying to turn it around so you can get to each angle to make the cut you need is a challenge in my eyes. Right? Am I wrong? Do you have a different view? Do you think that's different from what I'm thinking here? Not to mention the fact is, why bother to go through all that effort to cut all those, it's like 14, 16 different corners? Why bother? Why put it together like a puzzle piece? What was the purpose? Was that that particular stone so dear that they didn't want to waste any of it? Or, I say, was it possible that they were just able to literally slice it off like a hot knifey butter, and slap it in place? Right? Could be, right? Maybe, no. I mean, this is more cruder. This is still spectacular. If humans did this, and we moved these stones, these large formations and stuff, and placed them in the appropriate formations to make them work the way they do, it's still fantastic. But you can see evidence even in some of this, especially this picture to the lower right, where it appears that the stone was fitted so the other stone could be fitted. So they were all fitted and dressed to fit together to quite a range. The one on the lower left, that just looks like a natural formation that occurred, that something in nature caused the stones to just end up there in that pattern. The upper two, well, those suggest human intervention, but they're nowhere on the scale or they're nothing compared to this, right? You compare the two. I'm just putting them up there. Look at it. The one on the right is fantastic, and it's implied that stuff there came out of, is it Pumapuku or Machu Picchu, or somewhere in there, or a number of places. The one on the right, and the part of it is that, in addition to this, it's grudgingly being acknowledged that these particular stones are in the lower half of this fortification, these structures that were created out of them, and that they were created even by the Incans and other people that insisted these were created by an ancient civilization much, much older than theirs. and that they built upon these. So they didn't build these themselves. They just added another layer above them and extended the fortifications and walls and whatever. And we don't know what the original purpose of these structures were, if they were built 20,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago. How long does stone take to deteriorate, right? I mean, it boggles my brain, and I have to ask these questions. I have to wonder what we're going on here. So when we look at India, right? Now, India's construction is another thing. I can never get a good solid date on when certain things were made. Some things are made much sooner, much older. These look like a whole lot of collection of smaller stones, heavily artistically decorated, and then stacked together. Or they're one big column of stone that's been heavily modified with so many possible fracture points. The fact that they haven't fractured and broken over time boggles the mind. But the fact of the matter is, it still goes back to that. If this was all done by very crude chisels, it took a lot of effort and time, and kudos to those people and the determination of those human beings who decided to go to this great length. Right? On the other hand, what if this is not so simple? What if there was a stone technology in ancient times, or some ability to mold or soften stone? This has also been brought up occasionally, talked about. And I know that depending who you talk to and what type of stone you're talking about, it takes anywhere from 600 to 1500 or more Celsius to cause it to melt. So a little less maybe to soften it, but if you could soften it enough that then you could then use other forms to press into it to create elaborate works like this, perhaps. But it for the stone itself to actually become liquefied, because of liquefied stone, in my humble opinion, would be far more would go a much greater effort to explain to me how something like this might have been created, or something like this might have been created. Because what if the stone was liquefied in some manner and then poured into a mold, or pour into additional? We're back to that. I don't know what the heck was going on in this centerpiece where these two stair-step looking scissor things put together. But the fact of the matter is, stone is stone and stone isn't. So I looked it up. Stone, like limestone and marble, don't melt. It will not melt. It just decomposes. So if you heat it up to a significant form, it crumbles. It will not turn into a liquid form. But there are plenty of other stone that will turn into a lava, magma-like substance. At that point, if you have the means to manipulate it into forms and patterns, you could form it. So hypothetically, if you had an active volcano somewhere in the region, or somewhere where you had control over access to it, and you could somehow create sand forms like we do iron, and route that molten rock into those forms, and then allow those forms to cool, at that point you would then have rock stones that you made out of this material that you could potentially transport. Although there's argument on that is kind of, once again, flawed and hard to justify, because many of these stones are so huge, and in a culture that didn't have the wheel, that as far as we have no evidence of them having had any kind of wheel, getting it there by rollers and by sledge in the tons and tens of tons, and in some cases 1,000 tons range. Especially, it's much easier to buy dragon stone, let's say a 200 stone column, through the sands and hard ground of Egypt or the Middle East, than trying to drag it through the jungles and mucky material grounds of Central America. I mean, I've never heard anybody actually thought about, how the hell do you move something like that on a sled through mud and not die? And have everybody dropping dead of heart attacks trying. You don't have any large land-based animals that you can utilize. There's an intricate series of roads that the Incans built and the Mayans built, depending on who you talk to, but none of those pre-existed prior to the construction of these foundations. So the idea of bringing these things from so far away, has its own challenges. And we're back to that baffle in the mind thing. So when we look at these structures, these are fortifications or city walls or some grand palace or a temple formation or what have you. But you can look at the size of some of those stones compared to the people. And then we look back at some of the stones as well. And I look at the talk about how they fitted together perfectly. But yet I look at the actual stones themselves. And so many of them look like something they plucked out of the ground somewhere, turned them upright, and then chiseled to fit into place. So it is the possibility there. Well, once again, I did a little research, and Central Asia or Central America and America is chock full of diamonds. So the possibility that some human society advanced themselves enough to understand the ideas of forming and grinding rock to get the angles, to get, because there's more than one way to shape a rock. The accepted, we took a chisel and a hammer to it, is most common. But you can grind a rock down. You can use water to grind a rock down if you really want to spend a few thousand years. But if you took sand or another substance that's harder than the rock itself and put it into motion to where you have a rocking panel or something going, so you're rocking and grinding, you're just doing a version of sand grinding from some form or another. Whether we're back to using hand-powered, human muscle-powered, or some kind of device that somebody was able to create. If I could take a smaller, lighter chunk of the same type of stone and wedge some diamond dust in between it or some other coarse material and then just grind it back and forth over a period of time, how much would it deteriorate both stones to the point of being useful in one of these formations? That's the question. That's part of those questions that we sit here and we ask, and one of the reasons I do the video I'm doing, and I'm looking at history from a different angle and a different perspective, perhaps from fresh eyes, an uneducated set of, I'm educated, but I'm not educated. I'm not a specialist. I'm not one of the gurus of this particular stuff. I acknowledge that, but I still question it. I just become so obsessed with it, and let's see, I know I got other video. No, we get those. Where's the other one? Let me see if I can find. There's one. Darn it, I should not remove that. Let me go in here and go to my files. And let me look and see if I have. Yeah. These have probably been the ones that got me asking the most questions the earliest, the soonest, when I saw these. And this is that. What is that? Pumapuku or whatever, or in that vicinity of Pumapuku. Now, I'm not an engineer, although I did take some pre-engineering classes. Still doesn't make me an engineer. Computer-aided design, they want you to, for industrial purposes, we needed to know a few things. So, we come into this stuff, and I ask myself, just what the heck am I looking at? All right. Let me modifier. All right. So look at the perfect lines in this upper right corner picture. The perfect lines, the edge. This is stonework from thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago even, would still be impressive that it's so fresh cut. The notch, that perfect notch that goes down through that, what looks like concrete. To me, that looks like a cinder block concrete or something along that line. Perfect slice right down the center in depth with perfectly set in stone holes. The holes were drilled in there in somewhere. So we not only have this channel cut and a perfect edge, perfect corners with no jagged, no unnaturally jagged stuff, no cracks. Then we have perfectly spaced or damn near perfectly spaced circular depressions that have been ground into or pushed through this material. On the upper left is a bigger example. We have more of the same with a wider, larger hole and then a channel. It's like it served a purpose. Down there below is an artist's rendition of how some of these things would have been put together as in the walls. They've been very intricate and detailed, but there's a couple of issues that crop up when it comes to this particular location in Pumapuku. And I've watched a lot of videos and read a few books on the subject. which is one of the reasons I'm talking about it now, is there's not enough of this material in the vicinity for any significant building. Seriously, from my understanding, there's not enough of this material to put together like some kind of neo-archaic Lincoln log or Lego to create a full-size structure of any significance. And they're out there in the middle of nowhere. Now, it's granted it's nowhere now, but so who knows what it was like thousands of years ago or tens of thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago. Of course, we got the naphtha lines and other alien-based material subject matter within reasonable distance of this location and this material. And it got me speculating in my overactive imagination mindset. What the heck's going on here? Why was the purpose? Where's the rest of the rock? There's no evidence that the locals hauled it off and used it to construct their homes and other things like they do in other portions of Egypt. Middle East is rife with that. Other locations of the world, this is a huge supply of ready-made, durable material, and the locals, nobody else cares about that particular archaic site, is going to tap into it, and this is why they strip the outer casing off the pyramids, etc., etc. So, nobody hauls this stuff off. And most of the stuff is hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and still look like it was built 20 years ago or formed 20 years ago. And I go back to my earlier comment about melting stone. If there was a method to turn stone soft enough to pour, and you can pour it into ready-made forms, you can make these forms and then mass produce these sort of stones, like we do cinder blocks today. Right, cinder block is made out of what? A form of concrete. So if you had a way to ground up the stone, put it together with aggregate of other kind of material substances, and then reformulate it and then pour it and it hardens back into a hard substance, wouldn't that be spectacular? Huh? Wouldn't that even be plausible? Because potentially you could get this this powdery stone substance in some rare locations, like I said near a so-called volcano, truck it in by the waterproof bag if you can figure out a way to keep the moisture and humidity of the Amazon and South America from not somehow making the stuff hard again and then reforming it together and pouring it into a mold on site. Then that would solve many of the unanswered questions. So in my mind, I looked at this particular stuff in this diagram on the bottom, but this stuff, and I thought, well, some of it to me looks like it's meant to be a machine of some sort, right? Perhaps this is the foundation base of some sort of contraption that was used to do something. So hypothetically, in a wild, crazy idea, perhaps aliens that did come here or trans-dimensional humans came here to talk to and teach their ancestors how to be better humans, perhaps they did create their version of an industrial site for producing localized materials for their own purposes and projects. Perhaps they needed to their reason for coming here was less altruistic than what we like to imply, is they were on their some sort of passing through and their ship had a problem. They landed and they had to make some repairs. Perhaps this is part of a formation of equipment or foundation to support the ship or to support equipment taking out of the ship in order to mass produce stuff they need to fix their ship with, right? I mean, if you were creating a way to move molten metal to one form or another, this is one way of doing it. If those holes drilled through were meant to have liquid running through them, like some sort of hydro pressure system or some kind of oil system, like hydraulics, and you're trying to do it with what you have to work with, potentially this is one way of doing it. Just the questions add more questions, and the answers that people propose often create more questions, and they're not satisfying questions from my perspective. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, and I'm not going to even begin to try. So when I talk about, looking at these things, and I wonder, what was the purpose? Here we have this is an artifact from Egypt, and at a time when the Egyptians had mastered stone cutting and stone shaping and smoothing. So to have something of this nature is not outrageous. And what purpose it served, is hard to define. I mean, to me, it looks like that centerpiece is meant to hold an axle. Potentially, this is a stone grind, for grinding grain. It's just really elaborately surfaced on the surface to give it that decorative look that advanced societies tend to like to do. Or maybe it's some elaborate door that's supposed to roll into place and roll out of place. A piece of a trap that never got put into place. Think about that, the fabled traps of the Egyptian so-and-sos and ruins and tombs and things like that. But at the point the Egyptians got to the point where they could do what they're doing, a lot of history had passed and been lost and went out of knowledge. The stories of that the Egyptians are actually descendants from Atlantis is been floated around. It's still being floated around as some great civilization to the far west that existed in the Americas, especially South America, in pre-flood period that predates Atlantis. There's a few murky whispers in the dark about things like that we tend to poo-poo. Humanity isn't possible. The only advanced society we have is what we have now. And that's, to me, being disingenuous at best. We're not being fair. I go back to the wall and I look at this. This is a fantastic construction. And this has lasted thousands of years. If you go look at the wall, the Great Wall of China, and it is not nearly as impressive durable wise and construction wise or material wise as what we see from some of these places in South America. It's not make it any less impressive. My God, it's a major feat. That's why it's one of the great wonders of the world. It's on par with the pyramids. And the fact, the reasons behind it, why it was made, how it was made, is all well documented and viable and feasible and viable. All right. We don't understand what things like some of these great ancient artifacts of stone that's left behind in history that just marvels our brains. And like I said, they're everywhere. They're all over the world. It's just like the connectivity of certain mythologies, certain religions have a connectability. That's for a different video. But the fact is, suggests that humanity has been a much broader and much wider residents of this planet than what we give them credit for. And at various times in the past, things have come and gone. I mean, in the modern era today of 2020, as it comes to an end, we're looking next week. Next week is Christmas, a couple of weeks at the end of the year, thank God. And here in America, what have we seen? Some of the worst, one catastrophic problem after another piled on by indifferent, arrogant, incomprehensible government. And I'm including it all of them, the entire effing government. I don't give a shit what background, creed, whatever. They're all comparable to this to one degree or another. Some more than others, obviously. Pandemics, housing crisis, food crisis, punishing all these people for not having a job and losing their homes. They lost their jobs because our government shut us down because we're trying to do something for the pandemic, and we did such a crappy poor job of it. This is how civilizations croak. And it's the only reason that we're not going to destroy humanity and send it back into the Stone Ages is because humanity's too big now. And the rest of the world is handling it the best they can, but there's just sheer numbers on our side. Even in this country, it would somehow disintegrate into multiple smaller countries, we would still survive. Perhaps. How much of our architecture today would survive 10,000 years? 1,000 years. Most of the material we use to construct buildings today in the modern world are not that durable. That's one of the reasons I like the series on I believe it was HBO. It's a series of Beyond Humans. What would life how would the world be without humans? Well, everything would deteriorate and dissolve and destruct. The metal will rust and cease to exist in any form that we can recognize. Most of our building materials are not durable. Wood will rot and disintegrate faster than most of the metal will, depending on the environment. The concrete we use today is not durable. Show me one of them those vast, fantastic concrete interstate systems from the 1950s that aren't full of potholes and ragged edges and cracks and patchwork and cheaper replacement surfacing, etc., etc. Now, right? Most of those monolithic structures that we built to last, we used really durable stone and careful engineering, yet they're still fragile. The earth itself will push roots and stuff. That's one of those things that makes stonework like this so fantastic. Even in nature, it's designed unintentionally to reduce things. So if you had this kind of wall growing in my backyard in central Iowa, and it was 1,000 years old, the odds are pretty good that there would be plants and roots and trees and other things pushing through those cracks and slowly but surely pushing those rocks apart. Something here is so tight. That's the other marvel that they go on and on about, is about how you put a sheet of paper between these cracks, and you can't put a sheet of paper. You can't get a file knife between these things. They just, the mortar or whatever, if they're dry set, they're so perfectly set, and they've not weathered in any form to prevent any kind of cavity to get in, and that's vital. Think about that for a minute, right? Now, in this environment, like I said, here in central Iowa, we're in the middle we had a heavy snow a couple weeks ago, and now it's in the thaw. Everything's turned to water, and it freezes at night. So that water gets in these cracks and then freezes, thaws and freezes, and gets into the impurities, and would eventually make the stones crack, break apart, separate a little further, create gaps in those gapless seams, where vegetation and dirt and stuff over time can get in there and continue the process, and then the next winter and next summer and the next winter. See, so the environment where these are in South America they're dry, and some of them are dry, and that's helped them to retain this perfection. But there are others in locations that are not so damn dry. They're humid and wet and prone to, all you have to go look at is the less durable construction of many of the temples and other sites that were built and then in the Amazon and taken over. Most of those structures, just like in India and East Asia, the plant life is doing a horrible destruction on them over a short period of time, long period of time by our concerns, but history speaking, very short. So to have something that's 1,000 years old or 10,000 years old, it just marvels the mind. And I think it would be nice to know as much as possible how this stuff was done. Let's talk about one last thing. I'll go back to that possible ways. I've talked about sonics and sound. The powers of the mind that we don't understand, the way to manipulate the environment at a molecular level, the possibilities that we used mind power to shear the stone. As much as I'd like to kind of chuckle at that sort of thing, I still can't deny 100% that there wasn't some possibility there, or that they had access to technology that wasn't theirs. Once again, somehow, some way, somewhere, somebody provided them with the technology to cut this stuff or to melt this stuff and form it. Or they taught them this, and they had it for a short while, and then, like typical human things, we lost it. Wars are fought, power change hand, people are greedy. The fewer people that know things, the better. So that's one of those things another one of those things that helps make our society today far more durable, even in its most chaotic state, than anything that's come back in recorded history to date, is in part because everybody who wants to be can learn how to read and write and to utilize vast libraries and information at their fingertips. Even more so with this digital format version that we have today. The fact that very few people in ancient times actually knew how to read and write. Very few. Literacy was not a thing. It was very, very well guarded secret. It was almost a magic unto itself. How to do things and to put it in such a manner that they could be recalled and be accurate every time they recall. So when we look at this stuff, it said that when you melt stone, and each stone has its own specifics, but within the stone, there's other specifics. And of those stones, the material, the minerals react differently. So certain things will melt sooner than other things. So if you have, mica within your stone content, it's going to melt at a higher or a lower temp than the granite will, the rock itself. If there's other conduit, that's other things that makes me curious, because there's a couple places that they talk about in, is it Teotihuacan, Teotihuacan, has high levels of mica, a natural isolator for electric. It's found in concentrations in Brazil, and is found in many, many ancient constructions across South America. So this mica is mined and processed and brought and put into the construction process. How? Why? Is it melded into the actual stone, or is it melded into, the mortar that holds the stone together, or is it in the floor tile work or whatever? And the fact that this stuff is produced in certain areas of South America and transported as far as 3,000 miles away to another location in large, massive amounts, it just asks so many more questions. Let alone the fact that the city and its pyramids supposedly resemble that of some kind of computer microchip or a computer board or something, and it's potentially electrically conductive or can retain electricity or something. Just right. That's a question for another video, I think. But so, hey, what do you think? Give me your shot. Give me an answer, or give me your idea. So, is this not evidence that humanity has had advanced societies in the past, whether they were small and localized, or worldwide, or some conglomeration thereof, that predates all known history as we know it? Is this not evidence for that? How can hunter-gatherer tribes from 20,000 years ago be constructing these, and why would they? And what would drive them to build these massive entities and these huge structures, these walls? Why? If they're so worried about day-to-day life of trying to, and since they're hunting and gathering, they're not located, they don't believe in building towns and cities. You just can't find any evidence of the fact that they did. That doesn't mean that they didn't. Just thinking, just asking.